Hey plebe, you ever hear of Queen? Yes, Joe. Yes, I have. Everyone's heard of Queen. They're considered one of the greatest bands of all time, and they're my favorite music act of all time. No, plebe, I was talking about the Queen. Which Queen? Catherine the Great? Oh, look, she's chasing a horse around outside right now. Holy fuck, where's my camera? Freddie Mercury, Brian May, Roger Taylor, John Deacon. 4 amazing musicians. 4 amazing songwriters. Queen, my favorite band of all time. My favorite music act ever. You know them, or you may think you do. But I don't think there has ever been a rock band that has been more misrepresented by their own hits. There are many posers who say Queen is one of their favorites, but have never listened to a single studio album. And that's a shame, because for as popular as Queen is, for as many hits as they had, for as many stadiums as they still sell out, at least what's left of them, their albums never seem to get much critical love, or commercial love. Queen's highest selling album of all time is their greatest hits. So this one is for the real fans, the ones who actually fell in love with this band after listening to one of these albums, even if that album is low on this list. But guess what? If your favorite Queen album is my least favorite, you're still miles ahead of the posers. So here's some ground rules. Studio albums only, of course. And I hope this isn't too controversial, but I'm excluding Flash Gordon. Why? Because this album is so radically different than anything else they've made that it's almost a different genre. It's one of those things I can't rank because some people probably like it a whole lot, and the vast majority of people probably don't listen to it. Hell, I'm pretty sure I've only listened to it all the way through twice. It billed itself as a soundtrack to the movie, but it's actually a score, not a soundtrack. A kind of magic is a soundtrack. This is a film score with one actual song in the beginning and one actual song at the end. And you could listen to it as mood music. Some of the arrangements are really good, but the mood is broken by all the sound effects and dialogue from the movie that are inserted weirdly throughout the album. If I were to rank it, it would definitely be at the bottom of this list, but because of the nature of the album, I kinda don't even think it's fair to rank it with the rest of these. I am also excluding any remixed versions of Queen songs from the ranking. Almost every CD version of these albums has these, and I don't know why. Keep in mind, there is a difference between a remix and a reprise. The bonus tracks that are original songs and not remixes, of which there are only 4, I'm going to try and leave them out of the ranking, but I will probably mention a couple of them. So Make the Bed, Light the Light. Lady Mercy won't be home tonight. But don't take offense at my innuendo. After all, I'm only here to entertain you. Number 14. Hot Space. I'm sure this shocks absolutely no one, but Hot Space is Queen's worst album. It's the closest any Queen album comes to being boring. It's kind of funny that the reason most people shit on this album is because it's looked at as their funk album, the band trying to cash in on the success of Another One Bites the Dust, and that's really not it at all. Some of the funkier songs on this album are really good. The album just has no balance. The funky stuff is all front-loaded in the beginning of the album, and then the rest of the album doesn't know what it's trying to commit to. There are just so many songs on this album that are lackluster. If I had to name my 10 least favorite Queen songs, 5 of them are probably on this album. I really do not like Body Language. Action This Day and Calling All Girls are like bizarre, weird, half-assed songs, and Put Out the Fire is my least favorite Queen song of all time. Not only do I not like the song itself, but Brian May was so out of his element with the lyrics of this song. Like, yeah, gun violence is a huge deal in the US, no doubt, more now than when the song came out. But hearing an English guy totally misunderstand where the right to bear arms comes from really rubs me the wrong way. And if you know the history of the United States, you can probably guess why. There's a part in the song where I'm pretty sure he thinks the right to bear arms is a legal defense for murder in a court of law. Bro, what? That's never been used as a defense. It exists for people to protect themselves from getting murdered. These are balanced by some good songs on the album. I do think that John Deacon's bass riffs are amazing on this album. I actually really like Staying Power and Back Chat. Those songs are engaging. Life is Real is a really, really powerful song about the murder of John Lennon, written in the style of one of his songs. Freddie's vocals in Cool Cat are absolutely insane. Las Palabras de Amor is beautiful, and Under Pressure, come on, Under Pressure rules. But Hot Space is the only Queen album that feels called in, and too many of the songs feel really imbalanced and half-assed. The whole album, you'll be wondering if they really are gonna shake it. Number 13, A Kind of Magic. A Kind of Magic is Queen's only real movie soundtrack. And to its credit, it is a better album than Highlander is a movie. But because it was a soundtrack, the songs had to reflect the tone of what was happening in the movie. This creates an album that's a little bit frustrating. Because the good songs on this album are some of Queen's best songs, with Who Wants to Live Forever in particular easily being in my top 20 Queen songs, maybe even top 10. One of the band's most haunting songs, that organ, that string orchestra, Roger's drumming bringing attention to itself at just the right moments, and Brian and Freddie doing the best question and answer style vocal trade-off of probably any Queen song. It's a masterpiece. Not to mention the bonus track Forever, the piano reprise of the song is haunting in a completely different way. But this album has some other big dogs. One Vision is one of their best album openers. I really love the strange sounds giving way to the drum beat and then the opening guitar lick. A Kind of Magic is an awesome song with a bass riff that just does not quit. Princes of the Universe is one of those songs that is just so universally appealing and one of their best anthem rock songs. And Friends Will Be Friends and Gimme the Prize are great too. But then there's the other three songs. 1 Year of Love, Pain is So Close to Pleasure, and Don't Lose Your Head are three of my least favorite Queen songs. 1 Year of Love has great lyrics, but is a very slow song, and there's so much synth. Pain is So Close to Pleasure is fucking disco, and not exciting disco. And Don't Lose Your Head is kind of annoying. On an album of 9 songs, 10 if you count the bonus track, you don't want a third of the songs to be duds. Number 12, The Miracle. Okay, The Miracle is an actual good album. From this point on, the just okay to mediocre stuff is behind us. The Miracle is sorta crazy. It's the Queen album that had the most troubled production because this is the first album they recorded, knowing that Freddie Mercury had AIDS and was going to die. There was a shadow of gloom hanging over every portion of this album, but oddly enough, you wouldn't know it by listening to it, because it's also probably the cheesiest Queen album, which, all things considered, is a miracle. There's a sort of weird poppiness to this album, but not in the same way as The Game, which is Queen's other better poppy album. This one is 80s poppy. I think this may be the closest Queen ever came to actually sounding like an 80s band, and it was at the tail-ass end of the decade. But they still sound like Queen, and they still brought interesting sounds into the studio for this one. The opening songs, Party and Khashoggi's Ship, hit you right in the face. The Miracle has excellent use of a harp combined with synth that turns into an absolutely insane ending, with one of Brian May's absolute greatest ever guitar solos. Though I have to admit, as much as I love this song, the lyrics are so fucking goofy. It's like they start naming totally random shit, but then get serious when they bring up peace on earth and end to war. Like, you were just talking about the Mona Lisa, what are you doing? As a matter of fact, though this album is low on this list, I'm willing to admit that it might have Brian's greatest guitar solos overall out of any of their albums. Take I Want It All, great song, but that middle section in particular is insane. Then of course there's songs like The Invisible Man, Rain Must Fall, My Baby Does Me, that are a little called in but still good songs. But the centerpieces of the album, the two songs that actually do take themselves very seriously, are my two favorites. Scandal and Was It All Worth It, both of which have two of the best guitar riffs out of any of their work. Scandal, written about Brian's divorce, is by far the moodiest song on the album, dripping with anger and frustration at what the press was doing to him and Freddie. Was It All Worth It is a very special song. My favorite on the album, this song was a premature goodbye from Freddie, and it is the one that is about how far Queen came to get to the point they were at here on this album. This is easily one of Queen's best songs. But then there's Breakthrough. Breakthrough. A song whose chorus is such an obvious ripoff of The Boys of Summer by Don Henley that I'm actually shocked they didn't get sued. Good thing it wasn't a hit, I guess. Though Breakthrough is absolutely a better song than The Boys of Summer. Listen to them back to back and tell me it's not. So even though The Miracle is low on this list, I still like it. It is a worthwhile experience. Number 11, Queen, aka Queen 1. Queen 1 is, without a doubt, one of the greatest debut albums from a rock band ever. It is insane how competent this band already was, and the songs on this album reflect that. They sure found a good one in Roy Thomas Baker. For all of Queen's detractors who say that their songs all sound like show tunes, I fucking dare you to listen to this album. With obvious influence from the heavier British rock sound of the late 60s and early 70s, especially Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, it is Queen 1, not Queen 2, that I confidently crown the heaviest Queen album. Queen 2 is without a doubt the second heaviest, but Queen 1 is consistently heavy throughout with only a couple breaks in the excitement. And that's why this album always floats around on worst to best Queen lists. How much more you like their heavier stuff than their other stuff determines where people put this one. But make no mistake, heavy does not mean unpolished. Queen 1 is an incredibly polished debut album. On this album, Queen were already doing their studio tricks, overdubbing vocals to achieve the greatest sweep-you-off-your-feet harmonies in rock, and overdubbing instruments into classical arrangements, a sound they would perfect over the course of their next 4 albums. Queen could always make their voices sound like instruments, and their instruments sound like voices, and this is the album where that started. Not to mention, this album has some of Roger Taylor's absolute greatest drumming. The album starts off with Keep Yourself Alive, definitely the catchiest song on the album, and one of the tamer tracks as far as arrangements go. This honestly should have and could have been Queen's first huge hit. It is so radio-friendly. Doing Alright blends a piano ballad with a recurring hard rock motif. There's Great King Rat and Liar, the two big prog rock centerpieces of the album, which both feel like incredible journeys, with the former being my favorite song on the album, and both having some of the craziest guitar, bass, and drum parts the band ever recorded, with musical interludes that put other bands to shame. My Fairy King feels like a fairy tale, a feeling they would develop and evoke even more with their next album, and has a wildly good piano solo at the end. The Night Comes Down, probably the most subdued song on the album, is easily one of Queen's most underrated songs. John Deacon's bass playing on this song is fucking insane, and sounds so good harmonizing with Brian's acoustic guitar. Modern Times Rock and Roll is a sign of things to come for Roger, laying the groundwork for what most of his songs for the next 3 albums were about. Cars, girls, and rocking out. Then there's the more bizarre ones. Jesus, a song written by Freddie even though he wasn't Christian, and Son and Daughter, a song written by Brian that people still seem to debate the actual meaning of. And I love the heaviness of this album, but I will admit it's almost a little too consistent. At least for me. It's an album that's consistent while also being a little patchy, with the final 3 songs on the album not being quite as strong as what comes before it. Queen would learn how to reroute the sound into something more realized and with better flow on the sequel, but be patient. It'll be a while before we get to that one. Number 10, Maiden Heaven. For the life of me, I cannot figure out why so many people dislike Maiden Heaven. There are Queen fans out there who don't even think it counts as a studio album, because it was released after Freddie Mercury's death, so he didn't have any input. And if you think this, you're an ignoramus. I guess Freddie's dying wish for the band to finish the final songs he ever recorded vocals for somehow does not legitimize this album? Yeah, go ahead and argue with that. I'm fine dying on this hill. Not only does Maiden Heaven count, it cracked my top 10. Go screw. Maiden Heaven is Queen's saddest, most subdued album. Originally, Innuendo was going to be the final album before they knew how much Freddie had left in him. And for that reason, that album is also a goodbye, but a much more bombastic one. Queen on this album was a band that had essentially broken up under tragic circumstances and had to re-piece. And you can feel that all over this one. You can feel it in the final vocals Freddie ever recorded. You can feel it in the tone of Brian, Roger, and John's playing. This album is Queen's moodiest, but it's also one of their most beautiful. Context is everything on this one. This was the final statement of a man who would be dead very shortly, and of a band who knew that things would never be the same. I cannot imagine how painful it was for Brian, Roger, and John to have to record around Freddie's voice day in and day out while working on this thing. And I'm sure that this played a part in John leaving the band permanently. But the result was something softer and moodier than anything we'd gotten from Queen before. And Freddie's voice still sounds unreal on every song here. Take It's a Beautiful Day, the perfect prelude of what's to come, with Freddie just hitting those high notes like they're nothing. We got the title track, Queen's final anthem rock song, with an excellent guitar riff and bombastic drumming like something off of News of the World or Jazz. Let Me Live is a gospel throwback akin to Somebody to Love, with those classic Queen harmonies, and the only Queen song that Freddie, Roger, and Brian all sang lead on. Mother Love is probably the most haunting song Queen ever recorded, with chord changes that make your heart drop, and leaves the listener an emotional wreck, as it's very clear that the only reason Brian is singing that final verse is because Freddie no longer could. I Was Born to Love You has such power behind it. Heaven for Everyone and You Don't Fool Me has such a smooth coolness to them. A Winter's Tale is a song that just makes you feel like you're home by the fire. And of course, my favorite song on the album, and one of Queen's all-time greatest, Too Much Love Will Kill You. A song that means a lot to me for personal reasons and broader ones. A masterpiece driven by an electric piano, amazing lyrics, and unbridled, pure emotion. I'll admit I've never really been into the secret 13th track at the end of the album. It's very long, doesn't have a melody, and feels like an endurance test. It's very skippable, but that does not detract from what comes before it. Maiden Heaven was Maiden Heaven. It was written in the stars. Number 9. The Game. The Game is, without a single doubt in my mind, Queen's catchiest album. It is also Queen's shortest, simplest, most stripped-down album. After proudly not using any synths on their first 7 albums, this album is almost infamous for being the first Queen album to use synth. That being said, there isn't much synth on the album. The Game was made by a band who clearly wanted to make something straightforward, and that word is probably the best word to describe what The Game is. Straightforward. No frills, a rarity for anything made by Queen. But this album is not boring. This whole album makes you want to snap your fingers and sing along. There's a very noticeable funk and rockabilly presence on this album. Most notably on Crazy Little Thing Called Love, Need Your Loving Tonight, Rocket, Coming Soon, Dragon Attack, and Another One Bites the Dust. Crazy Little Thing and Need Your Loving have that awesome rockabilly style of playing acoustic guitar. Rocket and Coming Soon have this sort of percussion funkiness to them, while Dragon Attack and Another One Bites the Dust have a bass-driven funkiness to them. Play the Game, one of my favorite album openers, really shows off how well they paired the synth effects with the traditional instruments, especially leading up to that guitar solo. Save Me is a great album closing ballad akin to Teo Toriate. And my god, the sheer catchiness and looseness of the album showed that this band could drop the theatrical and anthem stuff and still reel you in with less overdubbed stuff. Dragon Attack has a guitar solo and a bass solo. There are even some silly songs on here too, like Don't Try Suicide, probably the most bizarre Queen song of all time, and Sail Away Sweet Sister, in which Brian sings about being in love with his sister? Like, what? The Game is a small, unassuming gem. Queen wanted to try something new and easy, and it worked out for them. It's just a shame that of all the things they learned on this album, they took all the wrong lessons with them to the follow-up. Guys, thank you so much for listening to part 1 of my worst to best Queen albums. Stay tuned for part 2. Hey plebe, Catherine the Great isn't out there! Keep looking, Joe. Keep looking. Folks, welcome back to part 2 of my Queen album's worst to best review. Let's kick it off with one that might just be a shocker to you. Number 8, News of the World. I know. How the fuck? How could I put probably the most influential Queen album this low on the list? It's News of the World! The album that turned Queen into the biggest live band of all time. The album that spawned anthem rock. And make no mistake, News of the World fucking rules. It is an absolutely awesome album. But it feels like one that is trying to punch in many different directions. People forget that this album was heavily inspired as a response to punk rock, and especially the Sex Pistols, whom Queen had an actual altercation with in a recording studio once. So they wanted to prove that they could do more than just bring ballet to the masses. This was combined with attempts they were already making towards getting audiences more involved in their concerts. So this album was also made with that in mind. And so the quintessential Queen album was made. The album that most people probably think of when they think of Queen. The album that made Queen synonymous with the anthem rock movement of the late 70s, and one that spawned countless homages and rip-offs alike. We Will Rock You, great opener, and so simple. We Are the Champions, legitimately one of my favorite hit songs by Queen. The ultimate song to celebrate a hard-earned win of any kind, driven largely by Freddie Mercury's voice and piano playing. Spread Your Wings, one of the lesser-known anthem rock songs on the album, and one that I cannot believe wasn't also a huge hit. John really knew how to write him catchy. Then of course, It's Late, my favorite song on the album, and one that proved that Queen could still do a complex, multi-tracked hard rock song and still make it sound like anthem rock. It's Late is incredible because it somehow sounds similar to what had come before, but also different at the same time. But those are just the big anthems. News of the World has many other songs on it where Queen was just fucking around with different styles. Sheer Heart Attack is punk rock. All Dead is a gorgeous piano-driven song about Brian's cat that died, and one that makes great use of his singing voice. Get Down Make Love is a soft, hard, dynamic experiment. Sleeping on the Sidewalk is straight blues, and a song that actually tells a pretty funny story. My Melancholy Blues is jazz blues. Fight from the Inside is both hard rock and funk at the same time, and Who Needs You is a perfect acoustic guitar-driven palate cleanser. See what I mean when I say that this album is punching in all these different directions? This album has arguably the most wildly different sounding songs contained on any one Queen album. The flow isn't quite as good as it is on some of their other albums, but the talent and production makes up for most of that. This was an anthem rock album and a Look What We Can Do album. But this was in part due to a very important precedent that this album set for a long time. This was the first Queen album on which all 4 members contributed more than just one song each. Which essentially boils down to this was the first Queen album where Roger and John contributed more than one song each. And so the different directions thing does make a lot of sense. Now that John and Roger were on equal songwriting footing with Freddie and Brian, a wild sort of diversity was bound to flourish. However, it would be in this album's follow-up that it would truly explode. Not to mention, this album has some of the most insane sounding effects made by a guitar I have ever heard. Listen to the crazy sounds on Sheer Heart Attack and Get Down, Make Love. That was the Red Special making those sound effects, not synths. How wild is that? The album that made the most heads turn towards Queen is one that deserves so much praise, but one that I think they outdid quite a few times more. Still, they did rock us on this one. Number 7, Inuendo. It can be said that Queen had two goodbye albums, Inuendo and Maiden Heaven. And although I love how somber Maiden Heaven is, Inuendo will always be the greatest goodbye this band ever gave us. Because Inuendo has one thing in far more spades: confidence. Inuendo is Queen giving something their all despite knowing that it would be all over soon. And they do give this album their all. It fires on nearly every cylinder. Nearly. But re-listening to these albums, I was shocked that I didn't place it higher. This used to be my second or third favorite Queen album, so placing it down at 7 is one of the biggest personal upsets on this list. Many people say Inuendo is a throwback to 70s Queen, and in some ways, yes, it is a very theatrical album, probably their most theatrical since A Day at the Races. But I don't think this album truly sounds like anything they did prior that much. But it doesn't have to. Inuendo is an incredible album on its own 2 feet. The album seems to have this very unique synth sound in the background that gives it a very dreamlike quality. For this reason, every song on the album feels like it only belongs on this album. This one has a distinct sound. The title track was their first prog rock song in a very long time, but I still think it sounds completely new and fresh. The opening drum beat leading up to the electric guitar strum feels like a world opening up. Not to mention the circus bridge, the Spanish and electric guitar riffs, and I love the existential lyrics. One of my favorites. Of course, I'm Going Slightly Mad is a huge fan favorite, what with the organ playing and Freddie singing lower than he usually does. Headlong, I Can't Live With You, and The Hitman are great harder songs, though The Hitman has some of the silliest lyrics of any Queen song. Don't Try So Hard and Bijou are haunting songs, with Don't Try So Hard having one of Freddie's greatest ever vocal performances, and Bijou having one of Brian's most soulful guitar solos ever. I mean, almost this whole song is a guitar solo. Ride the Wild Wind and All God's People are great despite the fact that they're kinda strange. I particularly love the Gotta Face Up, Better Grow Up harmonies on All God's People. And of course, the greatest final song on any Queen album ever, The Show Must Go On. One of the most emotionally charged songs ever written by Brian to Freddie. A song that stays with you long after the album has ended, and one that fires on all cylinders. Freddie's voice, Brian's guitar, John's bass, and Roger's drums are all in full force on this one. But if there is one song on this album that I think is probably my favorite, it might be These Are the Days of Our Lives. It's a very slow, very different song for this album. It's a very basic song, especially for Inuendo, with hand drums keeping the beat. But the lyrics and the delivery, my god, this is easily one of Roger Taylor's best songs, and is about getting old and looking back on that youth that he cherished so much in many of his songs. This was not the only song he wrote about vanishing youth, though. We'll get to the other one later in this list. Inuendo is one of Queen's greatest achievements, and in a way, was them standing up in the face of death and doing so with confidence and bravado. This album is wildly impressive, but I do need to talk about this album's one weak link. Probably the reason it dropped down the way it did, and that reason is Delilah. Delilah is one of my least favorite Queen songs. It is such a dumb waste of a song that they let Freddie put on the album because he was dying, and really wanted to write a song about his cat, and this isn't done in a cool, subtle way either. All Dead was about a cat, and look at how much subtler and better that song is. There's a part in this song where he mentions the cat peeing in his hotel room. There's a part where they actually start singing meow in the song. It's a bad song. It is one of the cringiest Queen songs. It's the one thing that throws off the flow of the rest of the album. This album might have moved all the way up to maybe number 5 if it wasn't for this song. Number 6, The Works. Have you ever noticed something about something and it feels like you're the only one who's ever noticed? And you can find virtually no information telling you that anyone else has ever noticed it? The Works is Queen's thematically deepest album and the closest they ever came to making a concept album. And no one is talking about it. I mean it, there are people who come close to discovering this and then no cigar. There is one Reddit post titled The Works as a Concept Album, but it was deleted, so you're just left with responses to something you can't read. So someone else must have noticed this. You have to dig a little deep to see it, but Queen approached The Works with the goal of combining their pre- and post-synth sounds, which they did do on the game, but on The Works that sound is much more fully realized. But then, when you listen to the lyrics of the songs, something interesting happens. They each take that concept of natural versus synthetic music and extrapolate it into a statement about the human race. The Works is about how we work. Those gears on the album are the gears inside us, making us tick. The songs on this album tend to either be about a fight going on inside people, or people trying to fight against something going on in society at large. It's like Queen's OK Computer and Hail to the Thief all rolled into one album. It's man versus machine, man versus man, and man versus himself. Queen were known for having songs that were very tongue-in-cheek, and maybe next to Maiden Heaven, this is their least tongue-in-cheek album. Radio Gaga, Roger Taylor's long-awaited first hit, was a response to the rise of music videos, of which, ironically, Queen had the most off of this album. And they genuinely did not like making these. He yearns for the days when music was just music. Something you turn on the radio and listen to, without any extra frills or fuss. This can be applied in a broader way to technology going too far. Ironic considering this is one of their absolute tightest sounding synth-heavy songs, with the synths arranged like a symphony, something Queen was great at. With great sound mixing, robotic vocal harmonies, and room to just let Freddie Mercury's vocals breathe. I especially love the bass and the electric piano. This man versus tech theme is picked up further by another song later on in the album, Machines. Machines is the middle anchor of the album and one of its absolute finest songs. Excellent harmonies, cool sound effects, and the robot voice? Yes please. It also doubles down on the man versus tech theme, as this is a song that takes place in a sci-fi future where we are ruled by machines. There are also songs about the human condition on here. Songs like It's a Hard Life and I Wanna Break Free. Both beautifully simple songs, are about giving up freedom for love and giving up love for freedom, respectively. Nice synth solo on I Wanna Break Free. Man on the Prowl is fucking awesome. An amazing 50s style piano rockabilly song. I was actually kinda mad when I found out that Freddie did not play the piano on this song. So, Fred Mandel, you played an incredible piano solo. This song and Tear It Up are all id, while Keep Passing the Open Windows offers some much needed optimism. But then of course, there's Hammer to Fall, perhaps my favorite song on the album, a song about the thing we fight against hardest, death. It's legitimately one of the greatest takes on death in any song, with some of Brian May's most absolutely brilliant lyrics put to music that fires on every cylinder, from the drums, guitar, and keyboard to the vocals and harmonies. This song is a masterpiece. As is the final song on the album, one of the biggest tearjerkers Queen ever wrote. Is This the World We Created? A tragic, very real song about what humans do to each other when we're left to our own devices, day in and day out. This song, unlike Put Out the Fire, is an example of good social commentary in a song. Short, simple, with only Freddie's voice and Brian's guitar. This song makes me wonder if maybe we are better off when the machines take over. And it's the perfect way to end the album. Oh, and I Go Crazy is a really fucking good bonus track. The Works is yet another masterpiece by this team of 4 unstoppable songsmiths, but this masterpiece shows a level of thematic depth that no other Queen album quite reaches. How on earth are there 5 more albums better than this one? Listen carefully, and I will tell you. Number 5. Sheer Heart Attack. You guys may have noticed something at this stage. There's a whole chunk kinda missing that we haven't talked about so far. Let me lay it on you. I think that Queen 2, Sheer Heart Attack, A Night at the Opera, and A Day at the Races were probably the 4 greatest consecutive albums ever released by a music act. It is unreal to me that these 4 albums not only came out one right after the other, but that they were the band's 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th albums ever. And though Sheer Heart Attack ranks the lowest of these, come on, it made it to number 5. To all the detractors who say the Queen songs sound like show tunes, I'll admit something right here, right now. Sheer Heart Attack is Queen's show tune album. The songs on this album actually do sound like they came from musicals. However, none of them sound like they came from the same musical. Aside from the Lap of the Gods songs, the songs have nothing to do with each other. They just have the super stage play quality. Most of the songs on the album are actually telling a little mini story. There's the story of Jimmy and Jenny on their public holiday, the tale of the Killer Queen, the Playboy tenement funster, a con man, most likely Norman Sheffield, the Lily of the Valley, and the Fall of Seven Seas, Al Capone, and Leroy Brown. The being pulled from different musicals feeling also gives the songs this fun tryouts feeling. The album feels like they each had limited time to make something to impress us. This album has 3 songs on it that are under 2 minutes long, if you don't believe me. It's the Queen album that goes by the fastest, but it has incredible flow and experimentation on it. On Brighton Rock, Brian May does things with a guitar that I've never heard emulated. Holy fuck, that guitar solo. Holy fuck. Then Killer Queen with harpsichord and sweeping harmonies that feel like a dream. Tenement Funster, a classic Live Fast Die Young Roger song. Flick of the Wrist, the Con Man song, that has such interesting melody and chord changes. Lily of the Valley, a ballad in the style of Nevermore. Now I'm Here, sort of acting as an anchor between the sillier stuff with its iconic echo effect and hard driving sound. Then there's In the Lap of the Gods with some of the absolute best harmonies of any Queen song. Stone Cold Crazy with its fast-paced iconic guitar riff, Dear Friends, which is a minute-long piano-driven song that's better than it has any fucking right to be, Misfire, John Deacon's catchy first songwriting credit, Bring Back That Leroy Brown, a minstrel throwback with Freddie playing ragtime piano and Brian playing a banjo, She Makes Me, a song placed perfectly, which slows everything down to prepare you for In the Lap of the Gods Revisited, my second favorite album closer Queen ever did, a piano-led choral sing-along song that just gets me all day. One more thing to point out about this album that is present in nearly every song, Freddie Mercury's piano skills. Queen was a very piano-heavy band, but this album, Jazz, and A Night at the Opera were their 3 most piano-heavy albums, and being that it is my favorite instrument, much respect. You can leave this one in the lap of the gods. Folks, thank you for watching part 2 of my Queen albums best to worst. Stay tuned. Part 3 will be the season finale. Hey, plebe! I don't think Catherine the Great's out there. Joe, come on in. Sit with me. You want me to come into your house? Yeah, have a seat. What's the occasion? We're bringing it home, Joe. We're bringing it home. You guys ready? We only have 4 albums left. Let's do this. Number 4. Jazz. Jazz is one of the most fun albums I have ever listened to and is Queen's most energetic album of all. It is a non-stop joyride from beginning to end. Remember how News of the World felt like it was punching in different directions? They found the direction on this one. If News of the World was their first foray into anthem rock, Jazz was their best. This album took the ideas from that one and turned it into an even bigger masterpiece. This is an album that makes you feel truly alive as you listen to it. This is the Queen album you just want to rock the fuck out to the most. And you can tell in every moment that this album was, without a single doubt, the one that Queen was having the most fun while recording. They had come out of their early struggles, the painstaking super-produced theatrical albums, found success and money with their new anthem rock sound, and had not yet alienated the fanbase with the synth stuff. Queen were at the top of their game when they recorded this one, and this album feels like they were channeling that confidence. Jazz is notably the album with the most songs that could have been enormous hit singles, though only 3 of them became hits. It also has the most songs that showcase what I think is one of Queen's most underrated music staples, the pairing of Freddie's piano with John's bass. If you listen carefully, there are so many songs on this album where the opening melody or the driving force are just these 2 instruments harmonizing. It's beautiful. Another note, starting with News of the World, John and Roger finally began matching Freddie and Brian when it came to having a bigger songwriting presence on the albums, rather than just squeezing one of each of their songs per album. So it gives me great pleasure to name this Queen's best album, which showcases all 4 of its members' personalities in its songs. Let's just say this is the Queen album with the most personality. Freddie's gorgeous vocals, just by themselves, open the album with Mustafa, a song that's a combination of Arabic, English, and plain old gibberish. But it's a clear ode to Arab music and shows how many different sounds this band could incorporate into their own. Then of course, Fat Bottomed Girls, legitimately one of my favorite of Queen's big hits. I love the country influence. Roger's drumming is top fucking notch on this one. Every rhythm change on this song has perfect timing, and the choral harmonies have power behind them, and I love it. Jealousy, a classic Freddie piano ballad in which Brian makes an acoustic guitar sound like a sitar. Bicycle Race, probably the best bizarre Queen song. A song that changes rhythm at a frenetic pace, and the only song I think I've ever heard with a bicycle bell solo? If You Can't Beat Them is classic John, catchy, upbeat, and fun. Let Me Entertain You, classic Freddie, an over-the-top exercise and overindulgence, but one with lyrics to reflect it. Fun It, classic Roger, a funky song about having a good time that's sort of an improvement over Fight from the Inside. Dead on Time, a song that actually captures the feeling of being late for something in a way that's almost stress-inducing. The way the tempo increases at the end, holy shit. Then, and I gotta say this, Jazz has 3 of my favorite Queen songs of all time. In Only 7 Days might be my favorite John Deacon song. It is such a sad song about a man who falls in love with a woman while on a trip and has only 7 days to spend time with her, and it's just so sad. The song goes through each day he has with her, and it's just the saddest love song. Then, of course, Dreamer's Ball. I don't know what it is about this song, but it has always enamored me. From that opening jazzy guitar riff to its jangly rhythm to the incredible harmonies and Freddie's voice jumping from highs to lows, this one does it for me. Good job, Brian. Speaking of Brian, the 3rd of those songs I mentioned is Leaving Home Ain't Easy. Not just one of Brian May's best songs, but easily one of the best he ever did lead vocals on. His voice is perfect for this song. A song with lyrics that are very personal to me. I also love that the harmonies sound awesome without being that classic Queen operatic harmony. And that in this song, it's the acoustic guitar that takes center stage on rhythm while the electric guitar is in the background. Then, the penultimate song, Don't Stop Me Now, a song that encapsulates the feeling of the album, letting loose and having a good fucking time. And honestly, this is probably the Freddiest Freddie Mercury song. Incredible vocals, incredible piano paired with the bass, of course. This is another one of my favorite big Queen hits. Then the album does something surprising. For the only time ever, a Queen album ends with a song not sung by Freddie Mercury. Roger Taylor's voice closes the album with more of that jazz, a really good wind-down song, yet one that amps you up at the same time, with Brian fitting a huge number of guitar notes in those tight measures, and Roger proving that he had the second greatest voice in the band. I haven't spoken much about Roger's voice, but the man could fucking sing. He had that cool raspiness, and this was, I think, their last song where he really belted out his trademark falsetto in a leading vocal. My god, the notes he hits in this song. And that's Jazz, an album on which any song could have been a hit, and the one that has my favorite hits per capita of any Queen album. The Queen album with the most personality, confidence, and energy, and the one that I recommend the most to someone who's just starting to get into Queen. Because trust me, if they like jazz, they won't want to stop at all. Number 3. Queen 2. I don't think there is any Queen album that it took me longer to fully appreciate than Queen 2. When I was a teenager first getting into Queen, I used to feel like Queen 2 was too overproduced, too over the top. For some reason, it just felt to me like there was too much going on at every moment on the album, and that they really learned how to reel it in as time went on. It was only when I re-listened to all these albums very recently that I finally understood. I finally got why this album always falls somewhere in everyone's top 5 Queen albums. Why the hardcore fans always sing this album's praises. It's really not overproduced. It's not overdone. It's perfect. Nearly every song on Queen 2 has a strange, medieval-sounding style to it that no other Queen album has, even the songs that are not about fairies and ogres and queens and kingdoms. The album sounds like a fairy tale. You listen to this album and think, it makes sense that the band that recorded this album is named Queen, especially considering how many times the word is used on the album. It also has the best flow of any Queen album, and I mean that literally. No other album of theirs has this many songs that just seamlessly connect to the songs after them. This makes Queen 2 the album that would have required the most pre-planning in its composition, and the most work overall in its sound mixing. And it shows. There is so much packed into each song on this album that every time you re-listen to it, you will notice something they slipped in there that you didn't hear on a previous listen. And though many bands of this era named albums after themselves with a number attached, Queen 2 does feel like a sequel to Queen 1. There are huge vestiges of that debut album here, but now there's sound dynamics. Now the prog and hard rock sounds are channeled into something that feels like it's constantly unfolding from beginning to end. Queen 2 is not a concept album, but it can fool you into thinking it is. The only real concept behind the album is that it has the white side, written by Brian with one Roger song, and the black side written by Freddie. Though these two sides feel a little different, and you could definitely tell which sides and songs were written by who, it creates a perfect balancing act. The white side. Procession, a mood setter if there ever was one, leads right into those opening guitar chords of one of Queen's absolute greatest songs ever, and one of the best Brian May ever wrote, Father to Son. Brian's tribute to his father, whom he often disagreed with about the course of his life, written in the context of a king telling his son what he will inherit. The son, of course, does not understand, but the father tells him that someday he will. With an absolute banger instrumental part in the middle, with drums and guitars creating a crescendo that's absolutely nuts, the final verse ends on one of the greatest lyrics of any Queen song. The air you breathe, I live to give you. Before finishing with that choral outro repeated ad infinitum until the song fades into yet another masterpiece written by Brian and, possibly, it's hard to say, my favorite Queen song of all time, White Queen. This is a perfect song. The chord changes. Freddie Mercury's voice, almost always immaculate on these types of songs, is somehow even more unreal sounding than usual on this one. The intro leading into those opening descending guitar notes, leading into that first verse, first bridge, then first chorus where the drums and electric guitars kick in, before pulling back into the second verse. A second bridge with different chords, leading into not one, but two musical interludes, which both evoke totally different feelings, before the third bridge, the crescendo, My Goddess Hear My Darkest Fear, then the outro. A song that is beautiful and haunting, loud and soft, all at once. White Queen leaves you feeling different going out than you were going in. Someday One Day is more folksy medieval, the acoustic rhythm feeding the electric lead, with Brian's lead vocals fitting the song perfectly, just as Rogers does on The Loser in the End. If Father to Son is about dads, then The Loser in the End is about moms. Wild Boy Rogers ode to mothers everywhere about the tragedy of becoming an empty nester, but with an added word to let them have their fun. They will remember you for it. Plus it ends with that sick fucking drum solo. And now, the Black Side. Ogre Battle is incredibly cool sounding. It opens with its own riff played backwards, continuing into the true riff, one of Queen's best. This song gets you pumped. As does the Fairy Feller's Masterstroke, a song with so much happening in the span of 2.5 minutes that it'll make your head spin. Everything about this song is manic. The lyrics, the harmonies, the weird little sound effects inserted where there's room, and it's all brought down to a simmer with Nevermore. One of Freddie's greatest piano ballads, even though it's only about a minute long. Then of course, most people's favorite song on the album, although I must admit, it's actually my least favorite song on the album, The March of the Black Queen. A great song though, sort of the album's centerpiece, and one that does amaze the ear with how many melodies can actually fit in one song. Aside from the chorus, repeated 3 times in the song, no other melody in the entire song is repeated. Even the verses each sound completely different, with some of Freddie's most incredible piano melodies ever recorded, and an amazing trill played at the end on Brian's guitar. I can understand why people do tend to love this one so much. I also love that it false ends and connects to Funny How Love Is, a song that brings a little melodic levity to everything we've just heard. Love the percussion in that one. Then of course the final song on the album and Queen's first hit song, Seven Seas of Rye, the only really catchy song on the album. One of the greatest piano riffs of all time, followed by the boom and guitar lick, leading into verses, a rocking instrumental, and those sweeping harmonic final verses, ending at the seaside. Not to mention that See What a Fool I've Been is without a doubt Queen's greatest bonus track on any of these albums. Holy shit, this song really does complement the rest of the album. It's bluesy, and Freddie's vocals on it are fucking insane. Queen 2 was composed, produced, and edited in a way that is totally unique to Queen's discography. There would be individual songs in the future that harkened back to this one, but no other full album would ever capture the complex and intricate feeling of this one. So sad, it ends as it began. Man, this one really hurts. Number 2, A Night at the Opera. A Night at the Opera was my favorite album of all time for nearly half my life. I remember the first time I ever listened to it at age 15. My dad and I were tasked with cleaning the house, and we just put it on and had to stop what we were doing. I don't think much cleaning got done in those next 45 minutes. I was a changed person after them. Which is why it hurts so much that upon re-listening to all their albums, there was one that was just a little bit better. But this section isn't for that. A Night at the Opera is Queen's most theatrical, campy album, yet somehow an album that also believably takes itself seriously. And it shines through without feeling overindulgent. A Night at the Opera was also the most expensive album ever made at the time of its recording, and was rehearsed before recording even began during a retreat the band took at a farm in order to really hone in on what they wanted this thing to sound like. There was so much hinging on this album that Brian May even stated later that if it had not been a success, Queen would have disbanded. So they were working under a lot of pressure, and that pressure made a diamond. The impact this album had on Queen, and the music world in general, cannot be understated. A Night at the Opera is without a doubt the most popular Queen album of all time, and was the album that changed Queen's destiny forever. Before this album, they were a great band with a unique sound that had done some great things, but they were still trying to find their foothold. After this album, they were legends. Every song on this album knows how to hook the listener, but none more so than Death on Two Legs, the album opener, with its fade-in piano octaves, followed by its fade-in guitar cacophony, which cuts back to piano staccato notes. What follows are the most scathing lyrics Freddie Mercury ever wrote, in apparent condemnation of the band's first manager Norman Sheffield, though his name is never mentioned in any part of the song. The song even does a fade-in final note harmony, immediately cutting to Lazing on a Sunday Afternoon, probably the campiest Queen song of all time, and their shortest. A nice little palate cleanser before the sweeping drums and guitars of I'm in Love with My Car, the most well-known Queen song not sung by Freddie. Perhaps because this was Roger Taylor's greatest lead vocal performance. His voice and drumming add so much power to a very silly song, backed by well-placed harmonies and guitar and bass portions. Then, of course, breaking these fast-paced songs is You're My Best Friend, another classic, catchy, radio-friendly Deaky song, which became perhaps the band's first big hit, not written by Freddie. But even in this simple song, every iconic Queen sound still shines through. Incredible vocal harmonies, and many overlaid guitars to give the impression of an orchestra, and a bass line that is going above and beyond. My god, listen to what John's bass is doing on this song. What follows is one of my favorite Queen songs ever, 39. Everything about this song feels magical. It's somehow folksy and operatic at the same time, led by the rhythm of a tambourine, an acoustic guitar, and an acoustic bass, and harmonies front-ended by Roger's iconic falsetto vocals, even with a bridge that is led by the harmonies rather than an instrument. The lyrics are also tragic, telling the strange story of travelers who, after going on some year-long journey, return home to find that much more time has passed than they thought. For all the shit Sweet Lady gets, it has one of my favorite guitar riffs of any Queen song, and the guitar melody during the chorus rules. Then, Seaside Rendezvous, another campy Freddie song with that instrumental portion, where it's just Freddie and Roger doing fake kazoo noises with their own voices. Incredible talent. Then, the following song, which in my opinion, was Queen's prog rock masterpiece, and another huge contender for my favorite Queen song of all time. The Prophet Song. Queen's longest song and probably the hardest to make song they ever recorded. A song that proves Brian May to be an absolute mastermind. There is so much in this song. Too much to even talk about, but let's try. The toy Kodo in the beginning. The wind, which was a processed recording of an air conditioner. The harmonies, the drums and electric guitars coming in at the precise right times. The harmonies of the instruments arranged in intriguing classical ways. Some of the most downright challenging vocals Freddie Mercury ever had to sing. That fucking a cappella section? Holy shit. Do you know how long it probably took to make that part? Giving way to an orchestral electric guitar arrangement. The amount of effort this song took to record is absurd, but it was worth every second. And with only a small outro as a breather, it bleeds right into Love of My Life, one of the greatest love songs ever written. Some of the greatest notes Freddie Mercury ever hit, both with his voice and on his piano, are all over this absolutely gorgeous song. And of course, this is one of those songs I mentioned before, where his piano and John's bass harmonize in ways that only Queen could create. And then it harmonizes with the guitar, both instruments having a shared solo. The harmonies, the harp. If this song doesn't melt you, I don't know what will. Good Company works so well as even just a palate cleanser, and its music hall-esque sound is especially awesome when you realize how many recordings of individual guitar melodies were used in this song, on top of the jazz bass and ukulele. My god. So I guess it's time to talk about Bohemian Rhapsody. The song that, well, do I need to talk about this song? This song was Queen's first super hit. A song that you can play for anyone on the planet and they'll know it. And it is an absolutely magnificent song. Freddie Mercury's mastery of prog rock, one of the greatest piano riffs of all time, a guitar solo that has been ranked the greatest of all time, plus a guitar riff later on, an opera section that steals souls, and a grand finale that, after listening to the entire rest of the album beforehand, feels like a final chapter before God Saves the Queen provides an epilogue. And yet, I gotta say, though I'm grateful for everything this song gave this band, I am so tired of hearing it. This song is everywhere. I'll even change it if I hear it unless I'm listening to this album. The radio ruined Bohemian Rhapsody. People ruined Bohemian Rhapsody. But still, I give credit where credit is due. Bo Rap feels right at home here, and if you can separate it from what it's become, it is the perfect climax. A Night at the Opera isn't just a masterpiece. It's one of those albums that changed people's understanding of what rock could sound like. This is the kind of album most musicians spend their whole lives trying to make, but it's one that can't be emulated. Even Queen never emulated it, despite what some critics have said about the final album on this list. Any Way the Wind Blows, A Night at the Opera is magnificent. Number 1, A Day at the Races. How could any Queen album be better than A Night at the Opera? How? Especially the album that ranks 5th on every ranking of Queen's albums. I'm fucking serious. Look up Queen albums worst to best anywhere else. A Day at the Races is always number 5, no matter what other albums are put above or below it. Didn't you ever wonder why this album is always that solid number 5 on these lists? I mean, it was their 5th album, so in a way it's appropriate. But really, it's because A Day at the Races is the Queen album that people think they should put at number 5. The final theatrical Queen album before their Anthem era, caught in the middle because it didn't change things enough. They always say the same thing. It's a great album, but it's derivative of what came before. Sure. If by derivative you mean that A Day at the Races took what A Night at the Opera did and made it even more solid. A Day at the Races took what started as camp on A Night at the Opera and went so full ham on it that it doesn't sound like camp anymore. A Day at the Races has all the theatricality of A Night at the Opera channeled into the most musically mature album Queen ever made. A Day at the Races may not have been one of Queen's game changers, but it was the first of only 2 albums the band produced almost entirely on their own, without Roy Thomas Baker, Reinhold Mack, or David Richards. Only Mike Stone, their audio engineer, provided extra studio assistance. So derivative? If you really want to make that argument, sure. But A Day at the Races sounds like Queen's most unfiltered album. And the filter was already magnificent to begin with. They didn't have to remove it. Queen is a band that succeeded every time they put a maximum amount of effort into an album. Even the albums that rank low on this list were them committing to a new sound or fighting through some moment of stress or hardship. Almost every Queen album is a new adventure in what this band felt compelled to show us, and they almost always committed to the bit. But A Day at the Races is special. Because even though they worked just as hard on this album as on any other, something about it feels effortless. Something about it feels crystal clear. The feeling is even in the name. If A Night at the Opera expresses the feeling of a wild night out full of wine and merriment, A Day at the Races expresses the feeling of waking up early and getting shit done. And Queen certainly got shit done on this album. There are only 10 songs on this album, and not a single one of them feels like filler. And they all appear in perfect order. Switch any two songs around, and the album does not feel the same. Tie Your Mother Down has got to be the best opener of any Queen album. The gong, followed by the first riff, which is actually the main melody of White Man, that makes you feel like the Emperor just walked through the fucking door. Then, that eternally looped ascending portion, and finally, that iconic guitar riff, my favorite that Brian May ever wrote. Freddie with the insane opening and closing vocals. This song gets you pumped for everything that follows. But then what follows is You Take My Breath Away, which, after the song that precedes it, hits you right in the gut. This song is meant to take the listener's breath away, which it does. My God, this song is so beautiful. Freddie Mercury's voice is angelic, complemented by his incredibly soulful piano playing and perfect harmonies. This is one of those songs that show off weapons you didn't even know this band had in their arsenal. Next is Long Away, a song of such indescribable longing and sadness. Brian May's lyrics convey such hope even in the face of sadness and remembrance, and this is yet another one of those songs that I'm glad he decided to take lead vocals on. The Millionaire Waltz is a shorter, concise prog rock song that again pairs Freddie's piano and John's bass magically. Contains those beautiful swooping harmonies, and has the waltz part in the middle, of course, with Brian's electric guitar playing over Freddie's piano staccatos. Then there's You and I, the classic poppy John Deacon contribution. It's crazy how absolutely solid Queen's catchier could have been a hit type songs are, of which John wrote many. Love the piano and guitar solo on this one. And that Walking in the Moonlight part, that little guitar trill and the cymbals rhythm send chills down my spine. Then of course the album's huge hit, Somebody to Love. One of my favorite of the band's hits, inspired by gospel music, and containing some of the most insane, if not the most insane, harmonies out of any of Queen's tracks. Everything about this song works, from the piano to the vocals, the guitar solo, and the drums banging in time with the final chant, which is followed by one of Queen's darkest songs, White Man. Another one of Queen's rare social commentaries. This song is essentially about what Europeans did to the Native Americans, and it is moody. Roger's drumming on this song is fucking intense, and nearly takes center stage. The man was known for knowing how to play drums in a huge, bombastic way, but here he does it in a way that makes the listener feel trapped in hell. The harmonies feel like a dark chant, as opposed to the multi-layered operatic Queen harmonies we're used to. Plus, what a final line. What is left of your dream? Just the words on your stone. A man who learned how to teach, but forgot how to learn. And in perfect juxtaposition, the song is followed by good old-fashioned Loverboy. Probably the gayest song Freddie Mercury ever wrote, and possibly my favorite campy Queen song. If this song doesn't hook you in with that piano, those vocals, and perfectly placed harmonies, I don't know what to tell you. Stop listening. And then, quite possibly, just maybe, my favorite Roger Taylor song, Drowse. Perhaps the only psychedelic Queen song, an effect attained by Brian May playing his guitar in a slidey way that wasn't his usual style. And sung, of course, by Queen's most underrated singer, Roger himself, in a style that wasn't his usual singing style. His voice is gentle on this song, the raspiness only really for a couple stanzas in the middle. And the lyrics, man. Many of Roger's songs tend to be about being young and living wild. Modern Times Rock and Roll, Tenement Funster, Fight from the Inside, Fun It, Rock It. But this song, along with These Are the Days of Our Lives, mark a moment where he realizes that age happens to everyone, even him. And that one day, you're past the prime that you took for granted. This and Long Away are both tied for my favorite lyrics on the album, and they would easily both be in my top 10 Queen lyrics ever. There's all the more reason for living and dying when you're young and your troubles are all very small. Hits like a motherfucker. And how does one end an album like A Day at the Races? With a song that's both a heartfelt ballad and a powerful crescendo, Teo Toriate, a song about having to say goodbye to a love, but with hope in your heart that you'll reunite. This one gets me every time. Using a piano and a harmonium organ, both played by Brian this time, not Freddie, the soft verses blending perfectly into the bombastic chorus, Freddie showing us how wildly different his voice can be in just one song, going from soft like the wind to solid as a rock. That When I'm Gone bridge, where Freddie sings harder and Roger busts out the tambourine, feels like a switch going off in my head. And note, the first and last chorus are done in English while it's the middle two in Japanese. This order feels important. First English so we understand, then Japanese to surprise us, then Japanese to remind us, then English again to drive the point home harder. And that echo effect on the final chorus harmony fucking rules. Then it ends on the tape loop, which on vinyl would circle right back around again to tie your mother down. I was always a CD guy though, and I actually kinda like an album ending where it's supposed to. Just a personal preference though. Hearing this for the first time with this loop would have definitely blown my mind though. It was a massive upset when, on this re-listen, I found myself actually enjoying A Day at the Races just a little more than A Night at the Opera. It was tough to come to grips with that, but I realized there was no reason to be upset. A Day at the Races was originally conceptualized as a double album with A Night at the Opera. They just didn't have the resources to do it that way, and so because of Opera's success, they had the power to go into this one with full hearts and nothing to lose. A Day at the Races is a whole lot of things. Busy, expressive, thought-provoking, wild, and focused. The most focused of any of Queen's incredible, for the most part, albums. But derivative? No fucking way. By every star in heaven, this is the Queen album that makes me feel like a millionaire. A Day at the Races is my favorite Queen album. Guys, thank you for watching the conclusion to my first ever music review. What are your thoughts on Queen's albums? What are your thoughts on my placements? I already feel some of the hate for Maiden Heaven and News of the World, so let it out, and I'll see you next time.